This is a reaction to a podcast by Lanz and Precht with Luisa Neubauer. They the most recent episode in their podcast, and I want to say a few things in general, about the climate change movement, and in particular about personalities like Luisa. As Tesla investors, we've been invested in sustainable transportation, sustainable energy for over a decade now. So we've put our money, our sweat, our intelligence, sometimes even our livelihood, particularly most recently, on the line for this particular cause. And I think people like Luisa Neubauer are the exact antithesis of how we think we can solve the problem of sustainable energy. So these people, and I'm going to use her just as a surrogate for many other. There's this, I think, Greta Thunberg in Sweden, and the world's full of these pseudo-activists, in my opinion, impersonating, aggrandizing egomaniacs who are using a really good cause, which is actually sustainable energy transformation, and just totally perverting it into something that has no purpose other than aggrandizing their own reputation. So this is maybe this sounds a little harsh right now, but that's exactly how we feel about it. And this conversation is a good example of that kind of behavior. Let me start with the issue, and then just a few comments about the conversation. And just before I go, apologize for the English version of this. Of course, it's a German podcast. I'm discussing a German podcast, so it would be maybe more appropriate to do this in German, but Not Even Known podcast is it's an English podcast, and I just want to keep it in English. So the point about the discussion is that apparently there's not enough discussion anymore about climate change, and Lanz and Precht, the two hosts of the podcast, invited Luisa to talk about this and try to explain why it could be that in the German media, but generally I would say the same thing is happening in the US. We're talking a lot less about climate change, and we're focused much more on other issues. And the podcast is about that. Luisa is trying to bring back the old fear-mongering, apocalyptic, oh, well, if we don't do anything, we're finished in 50 years, we won't have a planet Earth anymore, things like that. And that is a mistake. We should be focusing on climate change. It's more important than economic growth. Climate comes first, and then economic growth, and not the other way around. Actually, Lanz is trying to make, I think it's Lanz or Precht, one of them is trying to make the case then that you need to have a certain level of economic growth, a certain level of wealth to even talk about climate change. She's trying to turn it around. No, we need the climate, otherwise we can't have economic growth, things like that. I think these are all futile conversations, because fundamentally climate is a bad problem. It's a bad problem because the solution to the problem is not clear. It's a mission creep problem, which is that if, let's say, you have a solution here, you can immediately creep somewhere else and say, well, okay, fine, maybe Bangladesh has solved its flooding problem, but what about the Eskimos? What about the flooding in here? And what about this? And what about that? So we can continuously find reasons to point towards an insufficient adaptation, insufficient solution set, and constantly fearmonger and keep sort of the level of alert high if you want to. And I think people are getting tired of that, and that's why this conversation about climate change has abated, because people are just getting tired of it. They realize people aren't stupid, particularly voters aren't stupid, but the media has no interest in regurgitating the same concept over and over again. But here's the problem that we have as investors. Because we are actually invested in a sustainable energy transformation, that is what a Tesla investment actually is. We are not just neutral here and thinking, okay, fine, look, climate change is gone, who cares? We're actually hurting because we have been wrongly associated with these types of people. There was a time a few years ago when driving an electric car was considered by people like this Luisa Neubauer and these types of people as a good thing because it helps climate change and blah, blah, blah. And it has nothing to do. Nobody's driving an electric car because of climate change. The reason people drive an electric car is because it's a better product. End of story. But here's the thing. If you want to put this at a political level, if you want to actually put the conversation about sustainable energy and things like that at the political level, the reason you want to do this is not because of the climate, it's because you want to decarbonize the economy. Decarbonizing the economy, that is a real problem. That is a real problem with a real solution, which is you want to have less fossil fuels in your energy mix. So you want to invest and iterate around in interesting technologies that could decarbonize the economy, as opposed to what people like Luisa Neubauer and Thornburg and all these types of apocalyptic, self-aggrandizing activists do. What they want is you to stop consuming. They want to turn you into some socialist apocalyptic nightmare with rules and regulations that inhibit actually exactly the solution, which is freedom and in research and science and entrepreneurship, because those are the kinds of vectors which will eventually lead towards a better future with a decarbonized energy. Decarbonizing energy means progress. It means independence of fossil fuels. It means better energy densities, whether it's nuclear, whether it's fusion, or even solar, which doesn't have good energy density right now, but with an intelligent setup of solar power, batteries, and interconnect, you could actually have even better solutions. And there's a very interesting concept, which is that if energy density was so good with fossil fuels, we would have coal-powered satellites, and we don't, right? Because they are actually very bad, and there's very bad energy density. So fossil fuels are not the solution. Fossil fuels have been the solution in the 19th century, and for some parts of the 20th century, they've helped us, fight world wars and things like that. But that's certainly not the solution for now. I think we can do better. We can do better with nuclear, with small nuclear reactors. We can do better with solar. We can do better with solar plus batteries. We can do better with better, distribution technologies, transmission technologies, electrification technologies. We want to electrify the economy because electrification brings flexibility. It brings also sustainable energy, because with the flexibility of the fuel source that we use for our energy, we can then use the fuel that is less damaging in certain areas. In some areas, solar could be even damaging because you have too many solar panels. It looks ugly. But in other areas, solar could be the solution. In some areas, nuclear could be the solution. In other areas, maybe nuclear is not a good solution because of earthquake risk and things like that. So you have to kind of keep the flexibility up. The wealth of a nation, the wealth of a society is measured by its ability, by the potential transformation that a society can go through. And the more flexibility we have, the more research we have, the more innovation we do, the better we are off. So to summarize, I think people like Luisa Neubauer and this whole conversation about climate change is really, it's borderline annoying. It's not even just that I'm neutral and I don't agree with them. I think it's defeating the purpose. It's defeating the purpose. It's been very bad for us Tesla investors because we've been connotated with them, and then they actually went against us and started burning our cars. And climate activists in Germany have attacked the Tesla factory, which is absurd. If you think about it, if they really cared about the climate, if they really cared about sustainable energy, they would be cheering for Tesla. Instead, they're burning because, of course, they don't want solutions. What they want is permanent apocalyptic fear, so they can, take over society with their socialist ideology, which, of course, society is refusing. And that's what this particular podcast was about. And I think I cheer for that. I'm happy. I'm not happy that, the topics in Europe are now things like the war in the Ukraine and things like that. But at least we got off this silly argument that climate change is something we need to fear and that we need to curtail our society and the freedoms of our society in the name of climate change. Thank you.